Hello and welcome everybody to our webinar, Opportunities for Canadian Clean Tech Companies in the Water and Wastewater Sector in Brazil. I'm Monica McDonough, Clean Tech Trade Commissioner for the federal government based in São Paulo, Brazil. Thank you for joining us. And thank you to our partners and distinguished panelists for your time today and for sharing your knowledge with us. It's an exciting time to be discussing water and wastewater in Brazil, with some regulatory shifts taking place in the sector and momentum towards newly established universalization goals for water and sanitation services. And to bring you the latest on this, we're very grateful to have with us two of the top specialists in the water and wastewater sector in Brazil joining us for our panel today. Gesner Oliveira has held many prestigious positions, including being CEO of Sabesp, Brazil's largest water utility. Gesner is a professor of economics at Fundação Getúlio Vargas in São Paulo. His consultancy, Go Associados, is the leading consulting firm for the Brazilian water sector. So thank you, Gesner, and your team for letting us also use your virtual platform for today's event.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go Associados has completed a market study on water and wastewater that we'll make available to the Canadian companies following the webinar. Ilana Ferreira is the technical superintendent at the Brazilian Association of the Private Concessionaires of Water and Sewage Services, Abikon, in Brazil. Ilana has over 12 years of public policy experience at the National Confederation of Industries in Brazil. Abikon has an excellent sector report in English that we will also distribute after the webinar. Thank you, Ilana.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
I'm also happy to have two provincial colleagues with us today. Luis Antonini is Economic Attaché for the government of Quebec in Brazil.
Thanks, Monica. Proud to be here.
Thank you. And Claudia Peñalosa is Area Director for Brazil, Argentina, and the Caribbean for Ontario's Ministry of Economic Development, Job Creation, and Trade.
Thank you, Monica. Very glad to be here.
Thank you, Claudia. Just some quick housekeeping. This session is being recorded and it will be available online at the same YouTube link that you used to access to join us today. We invite you to put your name and company in the chat box so we can know who's joining us. We'll be following up with the Canadian companies about participating in our virtual trade mission in November, which Claudia will talk about a little bit later. So please type your name and company so we don't miss anyone. Also, feel free to submit questions and comments in the chat box as we go, and we'll try to address everyone's questions during the Q&A session at the end. We have some slides that Fernando will bring up showing our agenda for today's webinar. I just finished the introductions. I'll be giving a quick overview of the Trade Commissioner service and how we support Canadian businesses. Luis Antonini will speak about the Quebec office in São Paulo for they support Quebec companies. Gesner will give us an overview of the water and wastewater sector, the new legal framework and opportunities and challenges. Ilana will tell us about market trends for private sector participation in the sector and also clean tech demands for Abikon members and lessons learned from the pandemic. I'll give a quick teaser on some best practices on doing business in Brazil. Claudia will talk to us about Ontario's export program and services and about our joint virtual water and wastewater trade mission coming up in November. Finally, we'll open up for some questions. So thank you for your patience. I'll be brief in sharing some, Fernando, if you could bring up the other presentation. I'll be brief in sharing some information about Global Affairs Canada and the Trade Commissioner Service. 1 second. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Again, I'm Monica McDonough, Clean Tech Trade Commissioner based at the Canadian Consulate in Sao Paulo. This falls under Global Affairs Canada and the federal government. If you could bring the next slide up. Thanks. You can go to the next one. Global Affairs Canada represents Canada throughout the world diplomatically for trade and international development. Next slide, please. The key functions of Global Affairs Canada are international policymaking, promoting Canadian interests, values, and expertise abroad, assisting Canadians abroad, and providing a platform outside of Canada. Next slide. Global Affairs Canada's priorities are advancing Canada's interests through leadership, engaging in key global issues, contributing to inclusive prosperity, expanding trade and investment relationships, reinforcing key bilateral relations, and contributing to reducing poverty and inequality. Next slide. The Trade Commissioner Service, or TCS, is a network within Global Affairs Canada. We help Canadian companies like you export to global markets, and this is all done free of charge. On the next slide, you'll see that we are your eyes and ears on the ground in the market that you're interested in, to give you market intelligence, uncover opportunities, and introduce you to key contacts like a local representative or potential partners. Next slide. We're here to serve you, particularly small and medium-sized companies expanding into new markets. There are some criteria for being a TCS client. It's not necessarily any company that's present in Canada. You have to be connected to the Brazilian business community, have meaningful economic ties to Canada, contribute to Canada's economic growth, and have demonstrated capacity for internationalization. Usually, trade commissioners can make a determination if there's any question about if you're a client or not. So the free services that the TCS provides are preparation for international markets, market potential assessment, identification of qualified contacts, and commercial problem solving. To do business with us, reach out to the TCS. You have trade commissioners in regional offices spread throughout the provinces, and reach out to us in the market to help you gather information. There's contact information on the TCS website if you're ever in doubt. Can Export is a federal program that can financially support your internationalization plans, and some of you are already familiar with it. For small and medium-sized businesses, Can Export can reimburse up to 50% of eligible expenses involved in exploring new markets. Expenses can include translation of your website and marketing materials, travel when we're able to travel again. So please talk to me about it if it's of interest to you. Thanks again for your patience, and I'd like to now quickly turn it over to Louise Antonini of the Quebec office in Sao Paulo to address the Québécois. After that, we'll hand it over to Jesner, and if you haven't yet, please type in your name and company in the chat box. Thank you.
Thanks, Monica, for your beautiful contribution and introduction today. It's a huge pleasure to be here with you. Well, I'll switch now to French in order to talk to our colleagues from Quebec who are here with us today. Do we have our presentation? Super. Alors, bonjour à tous et à toutes qui participent à ce webinaire sur les nouveaux cadres légaux dans les domaines de la gestion des eaux au Brésil, notamment pour présenter les opportunités d'affaires aux entreprises privées du secteur de gestion des eaux. Je m'appelle Louise Antonini, je suis attaché aux affaires économiques au bureau du Québec à São Paulo et aussi responsable du secteur de l'environnement. Je saisis cette occasion pour saluer mes collègues conférenciers et conférencières aussi et souligner que c'est un grand plaisir de collaborer à cette initiative de ma collègue du fédéral, Monica McDonough. De plus, je voulais souligner également la belle contribution de ma collègue Olivier Dion, conseillère spécialisée en affaires internationales et responsable du secteur de l'environnement chez Investissement Québec International. Elle est basée à Québec. Il nous a beaucoup aidé avec l'organisation de cet événement. Next slide, please. Donc voilà, le Brésil est aujourd'hui le premier partenaire commercial du Québec en Amérique du Sud. Donc l'année passée, les échanges commerciaux des marchandises entre le Québec et le Brésil ont atteint 2,9 milliards américains, ce qui représente environ 38% des échanges entre le Canada et le Brésil. Le Brésil est donc le 9e plus important partenaire commercial du Québec à l'étranger. C'est important à mentionner également que le gouvernement du Québec a publié l'année dernière sa nouvelle vision internationale pour le Québec, souhaitant donc mettre l'emphase sur la diplomatie économique, l'augmentation des échanges commerciaux et l'attraction d'investissements étrangers. À ce titre, donc, le Brésil est un partenaire de premier plan. Il est bien sûr particulièrement visé pour la diversification des échanges économiques des entreprises québécoises en Amérique latine. De cette façon, le Bureau du Québec à São Paulo et Investissement Québec International travaillent en concertation pour jouer un rôle très important dans la promotion du commerce entre le Québec et le Brésil. Next slide, please. Thank you. En particulier, notre bureau à São Paulo, donc le Bureau du Québec à São Paulo, fait partie d'un large réseau de représentation pour promouvoir le Québec et son expertise à l'étranger. Le bureau à São Paulo coordonne toutes les relations économiques et diplomatiques entre le Québec et le Brésil depuis mars 2008, s'occupant donc d'établir, de maintenir le lien avec les différents paliers de gouvernement au niveau fédéral, d'État, municipal, ainsi que soutenir les entreprises et les institutions québécoises sur le territoire brésilien. Notre bureau soutient les entreprises québécoises souhaitant démarcher le Brésil dans une variété de secteurs prioritaires. Voilà, donc notre équipe économique est prête à vous appuyer à travers de plusieurs services. Donc, la diffusion d'informations stratégiques sur les marchés brésiliens, la mise en lien avec des clients et partenaires potentiels au Brésil, bien sûr, selon chaque besoin de chaque entreprise, l'identification des contacts clés, l'organisation des missions commerciales individuelles ou des groupes aussi, pouvant s'orchestrer à la demande de chaque entreprise ou bien autour des grands événements sectoriels au Brésil, par tous les secteurs industriels qu'on travaille le plus. L'organisation également d'accueil d'acheteurs au Québec, de clients potentiels brésiliens ou des grands donneurs d'ordre lorsque la situation le permettra, bien évidemment. Next slide, please. Voilà, donc on voit maintenant la carte de représentation à l'étranger, représentant donc le gouvernement du Québec, y compris la nôtre à São Paulo. Next slide, please. Thank you. Voilà, le 18 juin dernier, l'équipe d'Export Québec s'est jointe à Investissement Québec pour former une nouvelle entité. Il s'agit alors d'Investissement Québec International qui est devenu la porte d'entrée de toutes les entreprises québécoises souhaitant faire des affaires à l'extérieur du Québec et au Brésil notamment aujourd'hui. Donc, UQI, comme on populairement appelle cette institution-là, a comme mandat d'aider les exportateurs québécois à prendre les meilleures décisions stratégiques et aussi à réussir à la mise en œuvre de leurs projets sur les marchés internationaux, notamment le Brésil, via les bureaux du Québec à São Paulo. Next, please. Donc, Investissement Québec International est là pour offrir des conseils à différents niveaux, orienter les entreprises vers le bon service et appuyer ces dernières dans leur marché d'exportation. Et ce, toujours en étroite collaboration avec le réseau de représentation du Québec à travers le monde, y compris donc le bureau à São Paulo. C'est important également de mentionner que cette collaboration a d'ailleurs souligné lundi par notre ministre Fitzgibbon et aussi la ministre Giraud au Conseil de relations internationales de Montréal. Donc, dès que les conditions de la pandémie le permettront, nous suggérons fortement aux entreprises québécoises à participer aux missions commerciales au Brésil, organiser en collaboration avec IQI pour valider les opportunités sur place. De plus, le Bureau du Québec à São Paulo sera disponible pour vous appuyer durant cette mission virtuelle en novembre avec des services personnalisés. Bien sûr que le secteur des technologies... next slide, please. Bien sûr que les technologies propres et l'environnement font partie de secteurs prioritaires pour notre bureau à São Paulo. Le Brésil offre beaucoup d'opportunités d'affaires dans ce secteur-là et on va certainement comprendre un petit plus de ce secteur-là avec la présentation de Gessner et d'Ilana tout ensuite. Voilà, donc notre équipe est toujours disponible pour vous accompagner et soutenir sur les marchés brésiliens. Je vous remercie de votre attention et je vous souhaite tout d'abord un bon webinaire. Boa tarde a todos.
Merci, Luis. Now I'd like to hand it over to Gessner Oliveira to give us an overview of the water and wastewater sector in Brazil. So Gessner, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Monica. Thank to all organizers, to the Canadian Consulate. Merci, Luis. I would like to share with you a few ideas about the water and sanitation sector in Brazil. This presentation tries to highlight a few points that, as Monica pointed out, we put in the market report, and we had a great pleasure to collaborate, and of course we are available to help clarify any points and work with the Canadian Consulate. It's always a pleasure. I will stress three points. First, some challenges in the water and sanitation sector. Our major challenges, our major problems, I would dare say our social tragedy, but at the same time, as you are going to see, we have opportunities, which will show in the third point. And in the second point, I will highlight a few aspects of the new regulatory framework, which, as Monica underlined in the beginning, represents a good opportunity for investment in this sector. Next slide, please. Let's see the major challenges, and as this photo suggests, we have a great problem of water and sanitation in Brazil. You can see pictures like that could be taken in practically any Brazilian capital, especially the larger cities, but also in the rural areas. We do have great challenges. Next. What we suggest here is we we make an association between GDP per capita in water coverage, GDP per capita in sewage coverage. As you can see, there is a positive association, and in Brazil is on the trend line when we consider water coverage, but it's off the trend line when we consider sewage collection. If we compare Brazil with other emerging countries, given the GDP per capita Brazil has, it should have more sewage treatment. It would have more sewage collection and treatment. Next. Only 61% of total urban population has sewage collection in their household. So we do see a great variance among the regions. A major problem we have is that half of the population does not have access to sewage collection. Next, please. In Brazil, the non-revenue water is very high. If we take the average of non-revenue water, it reaches 38.5%. So it's a very high percentage. If we take some of the states would have more than 50% of non-revenue water. So this is a major problem and shows that there is a great inefficiency, but at the same time, it's an opportunity to improve the quality of the service and the efficiency. Next. Let's mention a few points about the new regulatory framework. We have already seen some of the challenges. I would summarize the challenges by saying that not all Brazilian population have access to treated water. So more than 30 million Brazilians do not have access to treated water. Half of the population does not have sewage collection. As we saw, 38.5% of the water is lost either by physical losses or commercial losses. And less than half of the sewage generated is treated. That means that we put back into nature more than half of the sewage produced. So those are the major challenges that Brazil has to face. But the new regulatory framework does help. Let's see some points. Next slide, please. I would summarize the major characteristics of the new regulatory framework by 3 points. I think that it helps in 3 aspects. First of all, it helps by standardizing regulation. Some of you may not be familiar with with our regulation of the water and sanitation. We have many regulatory agencies in the country. Since the conceding power is in the local government, and the local government has the right to regulate the service, and also the states have companies and have regulatory agencies. We have several state agencies. We have a few municipal agencies. We also have consortia of municipalities, which may have a regulatory agency. Therefore, we have more than 50 regulatory agencies which are in charge of regulation for water and sanitation. That means that a company operating in different regions of the country may have to obey very different rules. Sometimes there are contradictory rules that a same company has to follow. So this is a problem, and the new law helps to cope with this problem by giving the responsibility to ANA, the National Water Agency, to make a standard for regulation, to enact norms which are common to all regions of the country. So we believe that this will help to have a more uniform regulation, and therefore to have more legal certainty. Another aspect that is very important has to do with increasing efficiency. The law of 2007 was already a progress, but it did not clearly stated that contracts have to have very clear targets in a clear methodology on how to achieve and how to meet the targets. So this will give more incentive in better tools coupled with better regulation in order to companies to really achieve the targets of increasing coverage, and especially achieving universal services by the beginning of 2030. The incentive to efficiency is also very important for legal certainty, and especially when contracts are better designed. Last but not least, there is the incentive to competition. Until now, the state companies, which were created in the early 70s, had the possibility and the capability of operating through the so-called contracts of program or program contracts without a tender. So the state companies would have the privilege of operating in each state of the country without having to compete with other companies. Now, each time that the contract ends, there will have to be a tender, and there will have to be a competition for the market. Of course, the nature of the service is it does have many aspects of natural monopoly, but if you have competition among companies, both public and private, to operate the markets, that will certainly improve the quality of services. And it will permit new companies, new entrants in the market. It will permit the private sector to increase its participation. I am certain that Elena will talk about the market shares of public, private companies, and so on and so forth. And we'll see that there is a great potential for increasing the market share of the private sector. Next. Here I point out some highlights of the new view. There are several aspects that deserve discussing, but we can discuss that in the Q&A session. Next one, please. Here is an illustration of the number of regulatory agencies that we have in Brazil. The role of ANA in the new regulatory framework will be to coordinate, to standardize, to provide rules which are reflect the best practices in regulation. So we believe that this will help Brazil to have a better regulation and therefore to have more legal certainty and a stimulus to investment. Next one, please. We already have different modalities of public and private partnerships. We indicate here some of different modalities, such as asset leasing, administrative concessions, sponsored public-private partnerships, concessions and sub-concessions. So if you, each region of the country has its characteristics, and the different modalities of partnerships have flourished in most regions. Next one. Let's talk a little bit about business opportunities. Let's see some possibilities. Next. Here's the market share. As I mentioned before, the share of the private sector is relatively small. About 3/4 of the market is controlled by state public enterprises, and we believe that this will change in the next few years. Next one, please. I point out there are several companies which I believe that Ilana will talk about the associates of Abikon. There are several private enterprises. We point out some of them that have been active in the recent period, we can talk about them later. Next one. We also rank the 20 biggest companies. As you can see, as of now, the state companies are the larger ones, and most of them were established in the early 70s and serve the majority of the municipalities and population. Next one. There are some large state companies, some of them like Sabesp in the state of São Paulo, Copasa in the state of Minas, and Sanepar in Paraná are companies that have private participation. They have private shareholders as well, although the control is by the states of São Paulo, Minas Gerais, and Paraná. In some of them, in the case of Sabesp, is traded in the so-called Novo Mercado in São Paulo, and is also traded in the New York Stock Exchange. In the case of SEDAI, there is an intention on the part of the authorities to have a number of public-private partnerships in the state of Rio de Janeiro, and SEDAI will continue to exist, but several other players will also operate in the state of Rio de Janeiro. This is supposed to be done until the end of this year. Next one. An interesting aspect of the Brazilian case is that we do not have great production of water for reuse. We do have some regions which have major problems of water scarcity, but like the metropolitan region of São Paulo, for instance, but we do not have large production of water for reuse. We believe that we could have at least 10% of our supply as water for reuse, using the domestic effluent of domestic sewage to produce water for reuse, especially for industrial use. In this, our potential, we calculate in something of the order of 12 cubic meters per second. As of now, we have less than 1 cubic meter per second as production. So we could increase this production So the equipment, the technology necessary is something that would be of great demand in Brazil to do that. Next one, please. You see in this table a number of projects that are in an advanced phase to have tenders and to have public-private partnerships. We have some of them are modeled by BNDES, the Development Bank of Brazil. There's an important tender that's going to occur in the state of Alagoas for the metropolitan region of Maceió. There are large projects with large investment plans in the states of Acre, in the states of Amapá, also the state of Espírito Santo has an advanced project for the city of Cariacica. The state of Mato Grosso do Sul has an important project of public-private partnership for sewage collection and treatment. And it has a huge investment program. We are beginning to see a public-private partnership operating in the metropolitan region of Porto Alegre, in the state of Rio Grande do Sul, in the south. And the state company of Rio Grande do Sul is also preparing another public-private partnership. In sum, we have a number of projects. If we sum up the investment, we have something of the order of 50 billion reais in terms of investment. This is, of course, the new regulatory framework helps to stimulate those projects, but it's not necessarily it's not a necessary condition. Some of those projects were already developed. Next one, please, and we'll finalize in a minute. I think then we can discuss that there are huge opportunities for Canadian companies. I think that Brazil and Canada can have important gains in this relation. I think that companies may work improving the water quality. There are a number of regions in the country in which water quality is still very low. There is a great opportunity for energy efficiency. Reducing non-revenue water is a major challenge, and I'm sure that Canadian technology can help. In increase water and wastewater treatment, increase the systems will certainly help. Next one. Summing up, I would say we have enormous problems in water and sanitation in Brazil, but this social tragedy is also a big opportunity, because we have a lot of areas in which efficiency can increase very fast. There's a great upside in many of those projects. The new regulatory framework is, in fact, a great incentive to investment insofar it increases legal certainty. And I think that Canadian technology and Canadian companies in the areas of reducing non-revenue water improving the quality of water, improving efficiency in general, will be very welcome for the water and sanitation sector in Brazil. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jesner, for that comprehensive overview and great insights. For those companies watching, please feel free to send us your questions and we can address them during the Q&A. I'd like to turn it over to Ilana Ferreira so we can hear from the point of view of the private water and sanitation companies about the market trends and clean tech demands in this sector. So thank you, Ilana.
Thank you for this opportunity. I'd like to say that we believe it is extremely important to discuss the opportunities for the sector and the demand for clean technologies. Let me introduce myself. I'm Ilana Ferreira. I'm the technical superintendent at Abikon. But first, let me explain to you what is Abikon, right? Next slide, please. Thank you. Well, Abikon is the Brazilian Association of Private Concessionaires of Public Water and Wastewater Services. We represent 97% of the private companies, that is 121 concessionaires. Our main mission is to support the society and the public authorities to ensure the access of current and future generations to an efficient sanitation service in Brazil. On the next slide, we will see the reality of the public water and wastewater sector. Well, private companies operate in 291 cities. Jesner mentioned 325 municipalities with private participation. Well, we have some technical support contracts with some cities, but due to a methodological decision, we stopped considering then private participation. That's the reason we have a lower number, because we are focusing on actual operations, okay? So despite corresponding to only 5.2% of the market, private sanitation concessions have historically maintained an average equal to or greater than 20 or 21% of the total invested by operators in the sector. As you can see on the map, we are distributed in Brazil, especially in what we call the center-south area. The south is the southeast region, which means São Paulo, Minas Gerais, Rio de Janeiro, is where we have more concessions. It's not possible to see clearly because it's a region with many cities, so the map is not that clear. But the northeast region is the region with the lowest private companies participation, which is the region with the largest service deficit. The state companies, they represent 73% of the market, and most of them are unable to invest. This sector has long been dependent on non-repayable resources from the federal government. So, as mentioned by Jesner, this model dates back from the 70s, and what we observed in the between 2008 and 2012-13 was a great release of resources without effective results in attendance. So the money was invested, but the service level did not evolve, or the investment did not accelerate the service level. It continued to grow at the same pace. The average city in Brazil is small, and they usually don't have the technical capacity, engineers and etc. to structure infrastructure projects. Consequently, the money was released for unfinished projects, and in Brazil now we have hundreds of stopped sanitation works, for example. And the state companies that represent 73% of the market have a great difficulty to invest. They have a high cost structure, they are companies that we call swallow. They are really inefficient. So this situation added to the lack of adequate formal contract, also mentioned by Jasmine, and regulation led to a stagnation of the services. On the next slide, please, we can see the investment per water and sewage connection by operator type. You see, the private sector water and wastewater tariff is lower than the state companies tariff, as you can see here, is on the right side of the presentation. As you can see, the average private tariff is 4.29 reais per cubic meter of water, and the tariff for state companies is 4.36 reais per cubic meter. And the private companies invest more, so it really is a matter of efficiency. On the next slide, we see how, please, thank you. We will see how diversified the private sector operates in Brazil. So we operate with what we call full concessions. That means water and wastewater, sometimes with partial concessions, which means operate only with water or sometimes wastewater, and sometimes we establish public-private partnerships. And it's interesting because we operate mainly in small cities. 40% of our contracts are with cities with up to 20,000 inhabitants, and 60% of our contracts are in cities with up to 50,000 inhabitants. So companies, the private companies, they are prepared to act according to the different needs of the population. So now that I gave you an overview of the private performance, let's take a quick look at the future market trends on the next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So we can see that this is a moment of opportunity, and the private sector is already prepared for this new reality. The increase in participation by the private sector we can see by all the bids that are going on, their ongoing process, those ongoing process. Since last year, we have observed a considerate increase in contracts with private companies. Between 2015 and 2019, the annual average of formalized contracts for water supplied and wastewater treatment with private companies was only 10, the annual average. However, in 2019, we had 23 formalized contracts. Now there are now 9 ongoing concession processes in 8 different states in Brazil, and some auctions should take place later this year. For example, Alagoas, that is a big concession. And it's interesting to note that these concessions will also occur in areas where traditionally there are few private operations, such as in the Northeast region. Considering only the ongoing bids, the private sector will operate in 7.1% of the cities and 16.8% of the Brazilian population. We also have 8 more public consultations completed or in progress. Public consultations is an opportunity where companies and the population can contribute to the improvement of the bidding notice. So they have a planned investment of around 33.4 billion reais for the next years. If we consider those 8 public consultations, private sector will operate in 8.3% of the cities and 23.8% of the Brazilian population. So we expect that private companies will have around 40% of the market share in the next 10 years. And why is this so important, right? On the next slide, we can see the high demand for investments in the sector. Please, thank you. We estimate that Brazil needs to invest around 750 billion reais for the next 13 years to universalize water and wastewater services, or around 57.9 billion reais per year. Well, this amount of money is 4 times the investment made in 2018 in Brazil. In 2018, we invested 13.2 billion reais. So we'll face great challenges. And that won't be possible without the expansion of private participation. So the new law requires that the cities will have to provide for the universalization of the services by 2033. And companies will have to prove the investment capacity within that period. So the form of proof will still be regulated, but this is important because historically in Brazil, most existing contracts, as mentioned by Jesne, do not contain investment or service targets. These are called contratos de programa, and in some cases, the service is provided without a formal contract. So the new law seeks ways to provide greater legal certainty to the population and also for investors. It also guarantees a better form of regulation because from now on, you have to formally regulate these contracts. So, well, given the lack of investment capacity of state companies and the state's fiscal crisis, partnerships with the private sectors will be essential for the universalization. Okay, so on the next slide, please, we can see the demand for type of construction. I think that's really interesting. Okay, as we can see, most of the demand for investment is in sewage network and sewage treatment systems. That reflects, of course, the lack of services in this type of services. We don't have, people don't have access to sewage treatment. Okay, so on wastewater pipeline, we need to invest around 247 billion reais, which represents 49% of the investments necessary for the expansion of services. On wastewater treatment plants, we need to invest 57 billion reais, and so on. So I believe this presentation will be available for all of you, so you'll be able to look at the numbers with more time. Okay, so on the next slide, please. Well, we now we need a huge amount of investments, right, to reach the universalization of the sector. But it's important to think, and that's a great opportunity, to think what kind of universalization do we want and need to implement, right? Sanitation companies have the opportunity to add new green services and revenues now to their business. Biogas generation, commercialization of reusable water, and sewage sludge. So we have the opportunity to universe the services with the 21st century technologies, keep in mind the rationality of the circular economy. So next slide, please. Okay, here I'm going to talk a little bit about challenges and technological solutions for Brazil. Well, the first problem we have is that 15% of Brazilians live in rural areas, so the expansion of water and wastewater services needs to serve this population with appropriate technologies such as artesian wells or self-contained units and so on. So we estimate that it would be necessary to invest around 29 billion reais in decentralized solutions. I'm sorry. Another relevant challenge, please, next slide. As mentioned by Jesne, is the level of losses in water distribution in Brazil. Okay, Brazil wasted 38.5% of potable water in 2018, up from 38.3% in 2017, and also more than any of the previous 5 years. So the combination of leaks due to obsolete or badly maintained networks and fraud meant the losses of 11.4 billion reais for Brazil in 2017 That is a study that was released by Trata Brasil, and that value were more than the amount invested in water and sewage in that year. So technologies that help in the detection, reduction, and maintenance of water losses would be important tools in this technological gap. Okay, the next slide, please. Okay, another relevant aspect is the implementation of circular systems. In Brazil, the generated sludge, sewage sludge, is normally buried in landfills. However, private companies see this byproduct as a relevant economic input. Companies are really interested in transforming sludge into biogas and generating energy, for example. We know that in several countries, this is already a reality, and it should be a reality in Brazil as well. And this leads me to the next point, please. Next slide. Is it the same? This leads me to the next point, that is electricity inefficiency. This is a relevant problem in Brazil. Data from the operations here show that the costs of electricity consumption can exceed 15% of the sector's operating expenses. So we need more efficient engineers and smarter equipment. Automation, IoT are tools that promise innovative solutions. These are just a few examples of clean technologies that could be offered to Brazilian companies. And next slide, please. Okay, but when we talk about all the situations that we live in, and we can think about what have we learned from the pandemic, right? And what the companies have realized is that technology is our ally, and it helps us to rethink the business logic. The pandemic showed us that we can and should facilitate the customer's life without personal assistance, and that he can be served by bots equipped with artificial intelligence in chat softwares or social networks. So what we need to think is that all those old-fashioned handheld meters for more than 210 million people will have to be replaced, as well as the interface with this customer. Well, we really believe it's a time for change. I guess I sum up all the main information that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention. I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have, and it's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilana, for your insight into the private sanitation companies and their needs. It's very valuable information for our Canadian companies who are interested in breaking into this sector in Brazil. And speaking of getting into the market, I'd like to take the floor for a few minutes and just give you a quick teaser on some best practices for doing business in Brazil. I have one slide that can be shared with some of the best practices. Some challenges that we talk about when doing business in Brazil include protectionism. There is no trade agreement with Canada and Brazil, and Brazil does have high import tariffs and taxes of many kinds, which you'll discover when you start trying to import into Brazil. Another challenge that we talk about is bureaucracy. It's a very bureaucratic society. Sometimes approvals or certifications and requirements can be complicated. The rules are complex and often only available in Portuguese. So sometimes that can cause some slow business activities. The political system can somewhat slow business just because their political parties are very fractured. There's over 40 active parties in Brazil, a lot of political activity going on that can cause overturn in public servants and can sometimes result in weak regulations due to short-term planning, weak environmental policies. But as Ilana and Jesner mentioned, this is hopefully changing for the water and wastewater sector, where regulations are going to become stronger and more unified. So for best practices, we recommend you to be patient and resilient for the reasons that I just mentioned, with all the challenges that you might face. You can consider Brazil as a long-term market opportunity that can take 2 to 3 years to develop the market. Be ready to invest in alternative business models. You might come in with the idea of using the same business model that you might use in another Latin American country, and you might need to be flexible and adjust your plans as you get to know the market a little bit more. Create strong relationships and friendships. Brazilians are very friendly, as many of you know, and it's great to really nurture those relationships and get to know your business partners and contacts, get their WhatsApp. It's important to have direct contact with people. WhatsApp is not only a way of communications in Brazil, it's really a way of life. So that's important to remember. Visit regularly. Of course, this is hard right now with the current situation, but a lot of the business executives have been very open to virtual meetings and calls. So there's still a way to maintain regular contact. Find the right partners and allies. This is true for all markets, really, but for Brazil, you want to, get your partners that you can trust, your law firms and your tax advisors and other service providers. Get to know them well and find the right ones. You can target specific regions or market segments. Brazil's a big country and it's very diverse. I think the Can Export program actually divides Brazil into regions. So you can apply for Can Export for several reasons or just focus in on one in Brazil. So another recommendation is to, specifically for clean techs and small, medium-sized enterprises, is to establish connections with engineering firms, large private infrastructure companies in Brazil. As you see, there's a lot of big projects coming up and a lot of opportunities there. So those are some strategic best practices that we can help you with. And when you reach out to us with the TCS, we can help you navigate these challenges and put in practice these recommendations. So next, I would like to ask Claudia Penalosa of Ontario to take the floor and as our final speaker. And after that, we'll move on to Q&As before we close. So if you haven't sent in a question and you have one in mind, please send it to us in the chat box. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. And Fernando, if you can put my presentation up. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And as Monica was saying, my name is Claudia Penalosa. I'm the Area Director for South America and the Caribbean at the International Business Growth Branch of the Ontario Ministry of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade. Next slide, please. International trade plays a key role for Ontario's economy. Ontario exported in 2019 over 253 billion, which is equivalent to about a third of the province's GDP. Growth in exports can bring significant gains to Ontario. As you can see, 1 in every 5 Canadian jobs is directly linked to exports. 1,000 jobs are created in Ontario for every 100 million increase in exports. And exports accelerate innovation, increase foreign direct investment, and boost GDP. Next slide, please. I would like to go through the number of programs, export programs and services that we offer to the Ontario SMEs. And basically is to promote the entrance into the key markets. We want to help Ontario SMEs export into different regions in the world. In my specific case, as I mentioned before, it's to all the markets in South America and the Caribbean. And how do we do this? We have several programs. The first one is the export preparation seminars that now are webinars under the current situation. We have partnered with many institutions and many organizations throughout the province to deliver webinars for companies that have been facing major challenges with this situation. Now we're in the process of developing all the webinars for the fall for the recovery to help the companies recover. The next program that we have is the export business missions. Ontario SMEs are invited to participate in these missions that we organize that are staff-led to de-risk the entry into the global markets. Right now, all our events, all our programs are done virtually, and it will be the case until the end of our fiscal year, which is March 2021. And these missions involve, for the companies that participate in these missions, we organize briefings on the sector, on the market, and we help facilitate business-to-business interactions with pre-qualified prospects that could be potential customers, potential partners, distributors, and investors. And we work very closely in these business missions with our colleagues in the Federal and Global Affairs Canada. As I mentioned, all these missions are being done virtually right now. Next slide, please. Another program that we have is the Incoming Buyers Program. This is a targeted group of buyers that are recruited and are invited to Ontario to learn more about our ecosystem, and we organize one-on-one meetings with Ontario companies. Usually these programs were anchored with a global or an industry event in Ontario, but this has happened even virtually now. We have had already several programs that have been done virtually with a target group of buyers from different parts of the world. We organize market opportunity seminars such as this one, workshops, webinars in different topics, in different sectors, and in different markets. And we also have one-on-one export and market consulting with the companies. If you are not exporting already, we will review your export plan. We will review your strategy. We can introduce you to our export ecosystem partners and advise you on access to funding programs. If you are already exporting, we will identify market opportunities for you. We will invite you to export webinars or seminars. We will invite you to participate in virtual trade missions or in-person trade missions whenever they happen, or trade shows. And we can introduce you to key contacts in the different markets. And finally, Ontario has the Ontario Trade and Investment Office around the world. We have 11 offices in key global markets. And for Latin America, there's an office located in Mexico City that covers the Mexican market. And these offices basically help you connect with buyers and develop their best market entry strategy into that market. Next slide, please. And finally, I would like to speak about our upcoming Ontario Water and Wastewater Technologies mission to Brazil. We are launching it right now in this webinar, our next virtual mission that we are working in partnership with Global Affairs Canada. This mission will take place in the week of November 16th till the 19th, and it will include a market and sector opportunity briefing. There will be a tailored program of one-on-one meetings for each company participating. We will work from the closing of the registration until the week before the virtual mission in organizing your agenda so that your meetings are tailored to your needs, to what you're looking for and what your objectives for the market are. In case you need interpretation for these meetings, this interpretation will be provided. The deadline for registration for this virtual trade mission will be October 7th. It is very important for us to know if you are interested in participating in this trade mission. So we will be sending you a survey. And if you are interested, it will be on a first come, first served basis, and there are limited spaces. So if you are interested in participating in the mission, please let us know. My contact information is on the next slide. And I would like to thank you very much, and thank you, Monica. And the floor is yours now for the Q&As.
Thank you, Claudia. I'm excited to be planning this virtual mission with you. Thank you to all our speakers for your time and sharing your knowledge with us today. We're ready to go into our Q&A session to wrap up today's event. So now's your chance to send in your questions if you haven't done so already. We have a few. We got about PPPs for public sewage treatment. Is there any specific industry as a business opportunity? Unfortunately, Jesner had to step out, but we have members of his team with us. So if someone from the team or even Ilana wants to chime in on that, is Vicente with us?
Oh, I can answer that. I think I mentioned some, but if you want more specific details, I think we actually are measuring the need for investment for a specific kind of machines and etc. That's a study that we are developing right now. We can share with you later. But as I mentioned before, I think the main demand for investments are in wastewater pipelines. I think that would be the big deal for the next years for sewage, for the sector as a whole. I don't know if Vicente wants to mention something.
Okay. Maybe, I don't know if Vicente or Ilana want to comment about other industries, when you think about wastewater in other industries, like pulp and paper or automotive. Do either of you want to comment on those sectors?
Sure. I think Brazil is investing a lot, besides sanitation, on public illumination. It's a tendency here. We have someone asked about. I'm going to answer the two questions. Bankable guarantees for build, own, and operate projects. Brazil is investing a lot in sanitation and public illumination, and actually with lower interest rates. I think that's another option. But when we think about traditional industries, we are passing through an economic crisis. I can mention about infrastructure sectors. Aviation is with a huge challenge right now. So, yeah, I think the main sectors that we can think about are those, besides industry, traditional industries.
And about the guarantees, is the government providing guarantees, or what? How do you orient people?
Of course. Well, we have a program called PPI, that's Investment Partnership Program. They structure some projects for construction and operation. BNDES also has this kind of program. And we have a range of financing options, and some with financial guarantees for the sector. But I confess that the trend would be the search for private financing right now. The new government has this vision. So all those financing by BNDES or Caixa, we believe that will be reduced, and the companies we have to search for private financing.
Okay. And there is a question here about how do you find out more about the BNDES projects? I know they have a website. I think they have some information in English on their website
yes,
as well.
They have a website specifically for sanitation, and they have a version in English as well. I think we can share the link.
We can probably share links to BNDS, and PPI has material in English as well.
Yeah, that's true.
There's a question about heating, water, and space conditioning, natural gas or electricity.
Yeah, in Brazil, we use mainly electricity. And some cities, as São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, they use natural gas. But Brazil as a whole uses a lot of electricity. Yeah.
There's a question here about wastewater pipeline. I guess a wastewater pipeline is a wastewater collection system, including their pump stations. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have a separate number for pump stations that we have in the presentation, but we consider as well all the pumping systems that we need. And it's around 42 billion reais for pumping, only for pumping systems, for those pump stations that we need. We have this detail on the presentation.
Great. And there's a question here, what requirements, if any, are there for landfill companies to meet to preserve the underground water system? We didn't touch much on the solid waste management, but that's part of the new law as well, considered as part of sanitation. Do you know this, Ilona, about landfill?
Oh, that's a great question. Unfortunately, I don't have a specific answer, but we have a huge environmental rules, many environmental rules about this kind of landfill, but I don't have the information right here. I'm sorry, I don't work with this sector, but Brazil has a lot of regulations on this issue. And the cities, they have a deadline to environmental friendly landfills, and the cities, they must structure these landfills by, I guess, 2023. So we have a specific law about this issue.
Yeah, it's a very short deadline.
Yeah.
For water losses, water loss technologies, the investments are short or long time?
How much? Another great question. I don't have this answer, unfortunately, about how much is it, but it will be definitely long time investments. Because Brazil, we face two problems. We have a lot of people that doesn't have access to the service, and we have really old pipelines at the same time. So we need to restore all those old pipelines, and we also need to implement technologies to reduce these water losses. So it's we need a ongoing investment. So I would say it's a long-term investment, but I don't have a number, unfortunately. But that's a great question for our study and a specific study, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely, and there's definitely an immediate need and a long-term need. So hopefully we can get some new technologies on that. So there's a question about where to follow about the government tenders. I think the sites that were shared on BNDS and PPI should have information on those and are updated constantly.
Yeah.
Let's see here. For sewer industry, I wonder if there's any program in Brazil investigating the cost effectiveness of different technologies in the sewer industry.
No, I don't think so. Unfortunately, no, there isn't.
These are good questions. Thank you.
Excellent questions. Yeah.
And if we don't get to all the questions, we can definitely follow up individually. So
Vicente is here. I don't know if he can answer that question about another opportunities another industry opportunities that we had earlier? I don't know.
Yeah, sure. I think that there are a lot of opportunities here in Brazil, especially because we are passing through a new framework on the water sanitation, and I think that might help a lot of private companies get in this sector. So I think there are big opportunities in this challenging and this moment that we are living here in Brazil. So I think there are, especially when we think about reusing water. So I think there's a good point and a good opportunity for Canadian companies.
Yeah, that's true. We have some Canadian companies here that joined us today that have had success in other industries, like with water reuse in the mining industry, which is very important for mining. So there's other subsectors that you can have innovative technologies with water treatment in other industries. And the report from Go Associados has some of that in it as well, not just the coverage of the water and sanitation sector, but there's other industries covered by the report. So that'll be available to you after the webinar. Okay. Looking at these other questions that were just submitted. Is there a proactive approach towards cleaning rivers, lakes, and lagoons? And if there is, what is the approach towards these water bodies? Maybe.
Okay. We had this program, but it was a government program, right, in São Paulo. I don't remember the specific approach of it, but we have some public policies for this kind of solution. I don't know, Vicente, do you have this kind of information?
I think that you are right. Actually, the main information that you said, they are, when we talk about clean rivers, we talk about what the Sabesp and the São Paulo government are doing to clean, for example, the river Pinheiros, and they are using the efforts to try to clean that, and basically is a challenge for also for the company and for the government to do that.
Great, thank you. Ilana, do you know about biological treatments? There's a specific question about the use of biological treatment.
Yes, definitely. Some companies, they use it, this kind of technology. And we believe we will face an expansion of this use of this kind of technology due to expansion of the services. So yeah, definitely, yes.
Great. Does anyone know the cost of electricity per kilowatt for utilities?
That's another great question. I don't have the number here, but I don't know, Monica, we can send this kind of information and you can share with the companies. Okay,
yep,
so
we can share it.
I'll have this homework. Okay.
Sure. What else do we have here? Are there specific programs or needs to process wastewater for irrigation?
Yeah, that's another good question.
Maybe in the Northeast. I'm not familiar with any specific project, but it sounds like something that would be applicable in the Northeast of Brazil, where there's constant reoccurring droughts.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any specific programs for this kind of process. But yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know if we have a specific program for processed wastewater for irrigation.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Vicente?
Yes, we have a program here in São Paulo, not exactly a program, but a project. There's a here in São Paulo that you reuse, take from water and wastewater to industrial areas. So you can reuse that water to the industrial sector, but not exactly for irrigation, no. Most of the biggest one here in South America is for industrial areas, not exactly for irrigation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's aquapolo, but specifically for irrigation. Sorry. No.
Okay. Can anyone comment on the newest technologies to treat or recycle wastewater in Brazil? Either of you have comments on specific innovative technologies coming into the sector?
Well, some companies are using IoT. And so let me read the question again. Okay. Yes, some companies, they are already using IoT for the process. There's one company specifically that is using for a few years now. I think that's what we have as the newest technologies for now.
Great.
IoT.
Yeah, IoT, AI are becoming big in this sector, just like every other sector.
Yeah, that's good.
What is the quality of the electricity powering in the wastewater pipeline? Does it fail often? Is this a problem?
Oh, it depends of the region in Brazil. Sure, in some areas we have this kind of problem, especially with the state where the state companies operate in Northeast. We have, Brazil is so big, it depends of the city. So yes, that's already an opportunity. That's a great opportunity to invest as well.
Mm-hmm. That's terrific. We got some really good questions here. We were able to answer all of them that came in up until now. And if you have further questions, you can reach out to any of us. And I think now we can start wrapping it up to thank everyone for your questions and engaging with us on this topic. So if we didn't get to you, we'll try to get back to you. And thank you for your interest and taking the time to join us today. We'll follow up with the Canadian companies about the virtual mission coming up in November. Thank you to our speakers, Jesner Oliveira, Vicente Santos and team, Ilana Ferreira, Luis Antonini, and Claudia Peñalosa. I hope you all have a great rest of the afternoon and a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.